Hi everyone, it's Rachel here from the Shades of Orange. I'm incredibly excited to be filming my top 10 books of 2014. This is always one of my favorite videos to film and as always my favorite videos to watch. I just love seeing what are the best of the best books. Goes without saying, but these are the 10 books that were my favorite that I read this year, not necessarily actually released in 2014, and these are based on my personal preferences and reading interests, so just keep in mind that this is kind of my personal list and may not necessarily be everyone else's top 10 books, but these are the books that just really left a big impression on me this year. I just loved and kept thinking about all year long, so I just want to share them with you. The first book on the list, squeaking in at number 10, was Dare Me by Megan Abbott. This was not a 5-star read for me. I do have issues with the book, however, it left me with such a book hangover, like no other book this year, that I couldn't help but putting it on my list. It's a book about cheerleaders who are mean girls, and Abbott just takes it to the next level and just goes over the top, just pushing the characters to the limit, and the book is twisted and dark and just so addictive. I could not put that book down. Just so enjoyable, so even though it wasn't perfect, it still had to make number 10 on my list. At number 9 is Wintergirls by Laurie Halse Anderson. Laurie Halse Anderson is better known for her book Speak, and if you enjoyed Speak, I highly recommend checking out Wintergirls. It just has never gotten as much attention. It's a bit of an older book, but it's about two girls struggling with anorexia, and the author has this amazing ability to write about raw teenage issues and really write the emotions in such an open, honest way. I just love both of her books, and Wintergirls was just a fantastic young adult book. Highly recommend that one. Now at number 8 is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. This is a very creepy book. I highly recommend, if you can, reading it on a snowy winter day because the book takes place in winter and it's dark and creepy. It's definitely mild on the side of horror, but it left my hairs up on end. I absolutely loved the parts of the book that took place in the past, in the beginning of the 1900s. For that alone, I would have given the book 5 stars. I didn't find the current storyline to be perfect, but still the story as a whole was just fantastic, creepy, exactly what I wanted, and I would highly recommend that one to someone who wants to get, just a little bit creeped out, nothing crazy. It's not a full-out horror book, but just a little bit creepy. Perfect. The Winter People. Next, at number 7 is The Martian by Andy Weir. I never thought I'd have a science fiction book on this list because I don't tend to enjoy it as a genre, but I really feel that The Martian is a science fiction book for people who don't necessarily like science fiction. It reads a little bit more as a thriller with lots of survival elements. A man who's trying to survive on Mars after he's been stranded there. The character in the story is so funny. I love the humor. I always wanted to know what was going to happen next. Would he survive? I listened to it as an audiobook, which was amazing, and highly recommend listening to it that way. The narrator was fantastic. So if you're looking for a fun, addictive, fast-paced adult fiction book, highly recommend The Martian. I think it would appeal to a very wide range of readers. So definitely want to push you to pick that one up. Now moving into number 6, we are now in the 5-star book category. The first one on the list I want to talk about is The Other Typist by Suzanne Rindell. This is a debut novel, and from this point on I'll be reading everything else that Suzanne Rindell puts out because I was so impressed by this one. I just loved her writing style, and I'm not someone who normally picks up on the writing as much. It's not something I necessarily pay attention to in a story, but I just was completely entranced by Rindell's writing. Just loved it. I basically went to the library, opened up the first page, read the first paragraph, and I was completely hooked. So if you're thinking about picking up this one, I'd recommend doing the same test. The book itself is a historical fiction set in the 1920s, and it's also a bit of a suspense, mixing in crime and bootlegging, and if that just sounds amazing, then you've got to go and pick this one up. I love this one so much. Now at number 5 is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This is a graphic novel, which is actually a memoir, so it's not fiction. It is about Art telling the story of his father, who is a Holocaust survivor. The story is told with the Jews being portrayed as mice and the Nazis being portrayed as cats. It is such a powerful World War II story. I love that it's based off of an actual person and isn't a work of fiction. I'm always a big fan of Holocaust stories just because I think they are so profound and important to be remembered. It was just very well done, and the way it was portrayed as a graphic novel using animals made the book a little more palatable, so you are able to read it even though the subject matter is so dark. So highly recommend. Now at number 4 is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I've been butchering his name all year long. But The Kite Runner I think is very well known, a book that takes place in Afghanistan. It's the first book I've read by him and thoroughly enjoyed it. I definitely want to pick up his other 2 published novels. Just a profound story. I'm always a big fan of stories that have a big emotional impact, that are, you know, kind of that combination of difficult, important subject matter, but also really playing at, you know, pulling at my heartstrings. It was just a very emotional read, and just, you know, it's as good as everyone said it was. So even though it's now an older book, it's still worth reading if you have not. So apparently I forgot to film number 3, so I'm doing that right now. Number 3 is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I think most people know a lot about this graphic novel. It's gotten a lot of hype on BookTube. It's kind of a mashup of Star Wars with romance and humor throughout it. It definitely is an adult novel, saying that there's a lot of inappropriate content in terms of sex and violence, but in a lot of ways that makes it a lot more fun. Honestly, if you haven't picked it up, at least give it a try. It's so much fun, and I think it's one of the best graphic novels ever. I just love it so much, and the 3rd volume was one I read this year, but I would recommend the entire series, starting with, of course, volume 1. Now at number 2, probably no surprise, is A Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin. This is the 3rd book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. Normally, I'm someone who loves the first book in a series, and my love of the books afterwards in the series tends to go down, but I actually like this book even more than the first. I think it's the strongest of the 4 books I've read so far. Highly enjoy it. It's so worth picking up if you haven't completed the series and are still working through it. You got to get to this one. There's so much good stuff in it. I look forward to rereading it one year. Won't say much about the plot, but you know, if you're watching the TV show, there's no reason not to pick up the books. They are so readable, especially if you're already familiar with the characters and the general plot, and just love this book so much. There's a reason it's everyone's favorite. It's so good. Now finally, in the number 1 spot for me, a lot of you can probably guess this if you've been following my books all year, but that is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. This is the only book of hers I had left to read this year, and I read it at the beginning of the year, and of course loved it, gave it 5 stars. While this is my number 1 book of the year, I wouldn't blindly recommend this book to everyone. It definitely has a lot of dark subject matter, and at times was very disturbing. There were times that I just wanted to put down the book because I felt like Gillian Flynn was really pushing the envelope, and I wasn't sure where this book was going to go, but it was well worth pushing through it. It was excellent. But if you have a lower tolerance for the disturbing side of books, this one may not be for you. I'll let you use your own judgment. I find Gone Girl is a little more commercial, while this one isn't necessarily just blindly for everyone. But for me, it was so the right book. I love, love, love her writing. I'm sorry for everyone who is sick of me talking about her, but it happens. I look forward to whatever she writes next. I will be picking that one up immediately. So those are my top 10 books of 2014. Please let me know down below what were your favorite books of the year, or if you're a booktuber, feel free to link your video with your top 10 or top 14 books of the year. Always love to see what other people were reading. I love watching those kind of videos. Otherwise, also feel free to comment about the books I talked about. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'll see you again with a new video. Thanks, goodbye.